Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you are a returning subscriber, hello, bestie. You look amazing today. You see what happens when you subscribe to the Ethics Experts? You get a bonus greeting on every single episode, so hit that subscribe button. I am here with the man, Alain. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Nick. It's great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you too. So we got connected on Clubhouse, I think, back when Clubhouse was still a thing. And I kind of started to follow you on LinkedIn. I started to watch some of your videos, checked your book out. You are a thought leader on leadership. You're author of Cracking the Leadership Code, best-selling author. You've worked with, almost half of the Fortune 100 companies. Executive coach. You just have so much. You have so much wisdom and so many insights. I was just really excited to kind of get you on here, pick your brain, and hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here and hopefully to bring value to everyone who's tuned in. So thank you.
Yeah. So why don't we just dive right into this?
Sure.
You've been in this leadership game for almost a quarter century, maybe a little bit longer. How did you get into the game, and what was it like? What experience what experience did you have that kind of turned that light bulb on and made you want to take that plunge into doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, great question. Because certainly it's not the kind of thing when you're 6 years old, you think, I'm going to do all those things that you just mentioned. So that's not exactly how it turned out. That being said, I think looking at a lifetime of experience, you see looking backwards a through line. And for me, the through line has always been, I have been fascinated by people, specifically why people do what they do, what makes them tick. And specifically, why is it when we work in organizations, whether that's in companies, whether it's with our families of origin, why it seems that some people and some teams and organizations thrive and other ones are just struggling. And that comes back from early days, I think, for me. I grew up at a fairly unique childhood. I grew up in New York City. It's not that unique. Grew up with a single mom and my grandmother raising me, also not unique. The slightly unique part is the fact that my mother and my grandmother are actually both survivors of World War II, of the Holocaust. They're Jews who, my grandmother was in a concentration camp, and my mother, who's born in 1935, was separated and put into hiding. And so as you can imagine, it's a pretty intense experience they lived through. And these were my primary parents. So that shaped their worldview, that shaped their beliefs around who do you trust, who do you not trust. And I went to New York City public schools in the 1970s. What I found was the vibe at my friends' houses or at school was so different than it was in my house. And I think part of my fascination with psychology and human behavior has been trying to figure that all out. So that's what got me interested in the field of it. And then when I was 26, I went through a weekend-long intensive, we'll call it emotional intelligence training that just blew me wide open. I was like, oh my gosh, this was amazing. And I felt so empowered. And I just realized there were so many more tools to learn to start to access. How do I live my life? I know, what's my mission? Why am I here? And that's what really put me specifically on the course of, I want to be at the time, like a facilitator or a trainer or whatever you want to call it. And I kept reading, the more I learn, the more I want to learn and keep reading and taking more workshops. And that's what really set me on the course of wanting to do what I do now. Because at the heart of it, whether it's speaking, consulting, coaching, and training, my goal is to help people to achieve whatever results they want to achieve more easily. I think all of us wake up with great intentions. We want to do a good job. We want to do well. We want to leave a legacy and a lasting impact. And yet things get in our way.
Right.
So I want to help people to accelerate their learning curve so they can really become the people and the leaders they want to be. And by the way, when I say leader, I'm going to do a little level setting here. I don't define leader as a job title, a position, or authority. I think that anytime any of us are trying to get anything done with anybody else, or even just ourselves for that matter, that takes leadership. So if you think about that definition, we're all leading every day. So that's the kind of the long roundabout story of how I got to be where I am.
So that's an interesting definition. We have a similar definition where we say a leader is just somebody who's willing to be an example to somebody else and willing to do the right thing. And I almost like yours a little bit better because it's almost more inclusive and it helps to really extend that frame to everybody. And then it makes what you're talking about a lot more germane to each person's life, a lot more relevant to the work that they're trying to get done. How did you develop that definition along the way?
Yeah, so it's been interesting. It's numerous iterations. So I was really inspired by Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner, who are the authors of The Leadership Challenge, which is, I think, if you haven't read it, it's a wonderful book. It's kind of a classic in the field because they're the ones who really demystified and democratized leadership. They took it off of the pedestal of the special person, or at the time they called it the great man theory of leadership. And they had these wonderful examples of the fact that people are leading at all levels in all organizations every day. And they have a definition, what they call it, leadership is the art of mobilizing people to want to aspire towards a shared purpose, which I love, by the way, but it's also very, very lofty. And the more I got into that, then the next iteration for me was leadership is an art, but specifically for me, it's a performing art. What I mean by that is because it's what you say and what you do. And it's also, I think, informed by the fact that my background, I skipped this in my bio, but I was a violinist as a kid. And then I have a master's in fine arts. I went to an acting conservatory where I studied theater. So not your traditional business background. And what I think that the business world could learn from the performing arts. And it's funny because our world has moved to this. We are an experience, and I would even say almost an entertainment economy. Yeah. Because if you think about what is the primary, most limited resource we have today is attention. Right. And what the performing arts do so well is they traffic in our attention. A great movie or a great TV show or a great work of theater pulls you in and sucks you there, and you can't stop. Right. Like, wouldn't it be great if our meetings had that level of engagement? Right. And so I think the bar, the gauntlet has been thrown down, and now it's okay. So what do we need to do, and what's happening in the world? Because particularly with technology, we want to be engaged all the time. So I have teenage kids now, right? And I just think about when I was a kid, I got used to being bored. There were 3 channels on the TV, and that was pretty much it. And the kids, there's infinite. They can always find another web page, something, TikTok, whatever it might be. So the level of expectation of staying engaged all the time puts a lot of pressure on leaders to find ways to be that engaging. We talk about employee engagement. Well, you don't get engaged employees unless you have engaged leaders who know how to engage people. So anyway, that's how the definition came to be. And then the final iteration ended up becoming the fact that, it's about leading is about really any time you want to get anything done. And that, again, hugely broad, very inclusive. That takes leadership. And specifically for me, the skills you need to have. There's 3 meta skills that you need in order to influence, to get things done. First one is around connection, because at its core, this leadership definition is a relationship between the person who would choose to lead and the person who chooses willingly to follow. So you've got connection. The next one's around communication. How are we aligned to create common understanding? Because that is so key, because it becomes the platform for us to take all future action. If we don't have common understanding, we're going off in different directions. And then the third meta skill after connection and communication is collaboration. So what do we do to create an environment where all of us can work at our best? Because that way it's sustainable over time, and we're not feeling exploited and not burning ourselves and others out. So there's a whole well-being component to that. So connection, communication, collaboration become these meta skills to becoming better leaders.
I want to go back to your performing arts thing. And
sure.
I always find that there's like such magic when you get this sort of sweet and salty mix, or someone who comes from this other area and has these different perspectives. You can bring so many new insights into, a new realm has kind of grown kind of stale. And you made an important point, I think, when you're talking about we have this attention economy. Attention is our currency. And, as you were talking about employee engagement, like, it's just a term that kind of like, it has its own sort of, I don't know. It has its own sort of,
It becomes a buzzword.
Yeah, it's a buzzword. It means nothing.
Yeah.
But then if you think about it, to your point, it's about people being engaged. Well, what does it take for them to be engaged? It takes their attention. They have to have some connection. They have to have some purpose that's resonant with them for them to expend, discretionary effort in pursuit of this goal. And it's just, the simplest things or the most profound things are always kind of simple. And like, I just had such a light bulb moment when you were talking about, like, you have to be entertaining is obviously a caricature of it, or that's not what we're saying, but being engaged or getting people engaged means you have their sort of unbridled attention. When your kids are flipping through TikTok, they're zoned in on TikTok, or they're zoned in on whatever game they're playing. And there's this broader thing that I've kind of noticed that like there's this, the business world is this weird kind of non-world where like you can't be human, or you think, right? These are all these fallacies that kind of affect us. You can't be human. You have to sort of trim this piece of yourself out of the equation. It leads to inauthenticity, and it leads to, I think, a lot of engagements, so to speak, with our people that aren't resonant with them because they can sniff out the inauthenticity. Like along with all this attention, economy rising, there's also this commensurate sort of increase in being able to sniff out inauthenticity. Where do you see, again, this is going to be a broad brushstroke, and I'm sure we can talk about this particular question for the next hour, but where do you see the root of problems in leadership corporately? You've worked with a lot of really big companies. Fortune 100 companies are massive. Everybody knows about them. Yeah. Those are almost the, they're almost the end of the line in terms of what a business can sort of like Frankenstein into. And they are in those environments, I think, a lot of the worst of business sort of lives out. Where do you see kind of people's humanity kind of dissipating away, or what do you see at the root of the leadership leakage that's existing in these massive organizations or even at small organizations? Yeah,
great question. And we could spend hours talking about this one. So for me, as I think about this, and, it's funny because before we go there, I just want to pull a little bit more on your thread around engagement. Because, if you think about engagement outside of the buzzword of employee engagement, if you think about where do we use the word engaged or engagement, it's around marriage, right? We're not, that's pretty much where you use it. And you think if I was to ask someone to marry me, what is it I'm really asking? I'm asking them to spend the rest of their life with me. That is, I'm willing to invest time in effort and focus on them and them with me. And so what's interesting, if we translate that from the world of marriage to the world of, let's say, organizational behavior, as leaders, if we're not willing to invest in the people and care about them, and also invest in being intentional about how do we keep them engaged and keep that spark alive, as opposed to well, I said I love you the day we hired you. What do you mean I need to say it again? That wouldn't work in your marriage. It's not going to work for your employees. Right. So it's this sense of, what are you constantly doing to engage, to invest in bringing that spark? And again, that's where I think the performing arts are all about, the spark. And, we talk about leaders wanting to be inspiring. Well, what inspires people and how do you find out? Maybe you should ask them. So anyway, I wanted to kind of pull on that thread first a little bit more, because I think it's a useful thing to think about. Because again, it's easy to hang out in the land of buzzwords and jargon, and this becomes neutral and antiseptic, which is not very useful. So let's go on to your bigger, bolder question around what gets in the way. So the stats are shocking around effective leadership. That is, they're poor. So, and I've seen, there's a lot of meta studies, but I'll just share a few things that I've seen recently. So less than half of global professionals trust their employer. Only 40, this comes from an Ernst & Young study. 49% of people trust their employers. When it comes to communication, only 31% of people believe their leaders communicate well. And an overall leadership effectiveness, only 23% of people believe their leaders lead well. And you think, oh my gosh, that's such a low number. Why? Why is it so bad? Well, I think there's a couple of things that are baked into the system that perpetuate. And these numbers have been flat like this for a long, like decades. Right. So why is that? There's a couple reasons. And number one they're all connected together. It's kind of a cauldron. We can kind of put all these things into the cauldron, and they include fear, power, control, and hierarchy. Because I can guarantee you, if only 23% of people believe their leaders lead well, you've got 77% of leaders who are not leading well. How many of us are comfortable going to those leaders who are being poor role models? Who are you comfortable going and saying, hey, I think you could do a better job? Most leaders don't create a safe environment for people to speak their mind. Now, on an anonymous survey to Ernst & Young or somebody else, you'll share that because it's anonymous. However, in the soup of where we work, forget about it. And so what ends up happening is you have leaders who have the power, and frankly, what is in their interest to basically reduce their own status, right? Because you think about hierarchy and power, you have to be willing to go lower status to say, hey, I know I'm the leader, but we're all equal here. Now, what's fascinating is our world, because of technology, because of transparency, because of changing expectations and human conditions, we're expecting a flatter world. Yet so many people, when they get into the leadership role, they start automatically, unconsciously, just playing out the behaviors of, and it may go back to childhood, it may go back to, because I'm your dad, that's why you do these things, right? That classic, basic power struggle. Someone's in charge and someone basically has the final say, right? And so what's challenging for a lot of leaders is they still think in binary. They're like, wow, well, if I don't have the final say, this becomes a free-for-all.
Right.
Or this means that we're never going to get anything done. Well, you've just totally gone into this very old world binary. It's either this way or that way, versus what I call the new school or facilitative mindset of a leader. It's much more a both and. Well, what if you created a world? Yes, there's still hierarchy. And yes, there are decisions that have to be made because we have a business to run. But rather than thinking that everybody has a vote in terms of what we're doing, what if everybody has a voice and we value and care about that voice? And if we choose to go in a different direction from that voice, we still respect the voice and the person and value the individual and give them context as to why we're going there,
right?
So that they come along. Because it's amazing how, and just think about your own experience, Nick, and I can think of my own, how if people have the rationale and they're treated with a baseline level of caring and respect, they'll be willing to disagree and yet go along. But that takes more time up front.
Right.
And I think one of the other fallacies that have plagued leaders for decades now is, most leaders have grown up with the inherited legacy of the industrial age, right? So Frederick Winslow Taylor and the assembly line and the wisdom of the time was around efficiency. And the challenge that we have today is we as leaders, if efficiency becomes your holy grail, don't confuse efficiency with effectiveness. Let me give you an example. Let's say I'm leading a team of 10 people and we have some new change-like initiative going on. And I want to tell my people about what's going on. Now, the most efficient thing for me to do is, I've got this great technology called email. I'm going to email everybody the same email. This is what we're doing, team. Let's go. Boom. Get done. One email, 10 people. We're done. Now, they get the information, but how inspired are they to take that along? Versus if I was to have a one-on-one 15 or 30-minute conversation with each one of them to explain that, to turn this from a push into a pull, a dialogue, explaining what's going on, answering any unanswered questions, seeing how this impacts them. Now, that's going to take me more time up front. Absolutely. However, in the long run, if this is important, where are we going to get closer to the likely outcome we're trying to create? If it's important for me to have all these folks on board and aligned and moving forward, right?
Yep.
Notice I didn't say buy-in, right? Which is more
Another
like
buzzword.
I'm selling something,
Totally.
Another buzzword. Or another thing I didn't say was, I got to drill this down to the front lines, which, by the way, drilling it down, that's an efficiency, mechanical engineer mindset, right? If you're on the front lines, you're not thinking, geez, I really missed the fact my leader hasn't drilled anything into me lately. I missed that.
Feeling neglected. Yeah.
I feel neglected. Drill into me, please. Drill,
Please,
baby, drill.
Drill away. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of these things. So watching our language, we have to rehumanize leadership because we are still struggling with this. We have the technology to be able to democratize and to collaborate more. And yet we're still going to have a certain level of hierarchy, but we're seeing it's getting flatter. But these are fascinating times. And I think leaders have to become better students of human behavior.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, the fact is, what is the differentiating edge you have now? Because pretty much all that repetitive manual stuff has probably been outsourced to an app or an algorithm or a database somewhere. Whereas what is left with working with people is the human factor, is how do you connect with empathy through creating credibility and building trust? How do you make sure that you're not just sharing information, but actually creating insight so people can make good decisions? And how are you creating an environment of collaboration where people can do their best work? So anyway, that's another big answer to your question.
I mean, there's so much in that. And what I was kind of struck with as you were describing this is, a new leader steps into a position and they fall into these sort of old world industrial revolution frameworks. Yeah. And they wonder why, it kind of creates a cycle, right? Like you as a leader end up, having a huge impact on the environment that you're controlling, so to speak. And at the root of someone not creating a facilitative or like collaborative environment, or at the root of someone not willing to like level set and just talk across the table, irrespective of like rank, so to speak, and just talking like humans, it seems like there's some kind of fear in that exact thing, right? Fear that everything's going to go wrong, fear that I'm going to be undermined, fear that I'm going to get in trouble and I'm not worthy for this position. Like there's some kind of a fear root in there. And obviously then your people are not going to feel psychologically safe. Like just acting in that way puts up an implied like wall, preventing that feedback of saying, hey, I think you could do this a little bit better, or hey, can I give you a little bit of feedback? What do you think is at the root of that fear for folks? I mean, the reason I'm asking is because I've seen this happen with people who are complaining about the hierarchy, complaining about, blah, blah, blah. And then they get in that position and they fall into those same old habits. It's a very bizarre paradox.
Totally bizarre paradox. And it happens all the time. I think what is at the root of this is the fact that most people who wind up in a leadership role got there because they were excellent doers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So we think, and so you did so well that you got seen for doing, and somebody said, you're a great doer. Let's make you the manager of this whole team of doers. And guess what? Getting to that new role is, as Marshall Goldsmith famously says, what got you here is not going to get you there. A doer mindset will only get you so far. And I think when you are the doer, you have total agency and control over your doing. When you are no longer doing, but you are now leading people, you have to let go of that kind of doer control. And that is terrifying for people because that has been your strength. That has been your go-to. And so recognizing like you can be like the most awesome compliance officer and like be able to like look at every little legal in and out and see what's going on. And suddenly you need to either lead a team of people or you have to work with stakeholders in the organization who don't come from that background. It's no longer being about the doer. It's about how are you creating relationships? And as you said here, to that help of creating psychological safety. And so we have to let go of control.
Right.
And as much as people can understand that intellectually, you have to do your own emotional work to like, what is in my way? What is sabotaging me? Because, you developed certain skills early on to become that high performer. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there. You would be listening to this podcast right now. And look, how many people in the world are listening to some kind of a self-development, self-improvement podcast right now? It's actually a shockingly small percentage of the population.
Right.
But you're here, which means you want to get better. And so recognizing it's not getting better in the same way of like, get it, got it, good. This is not another ladder rung to grab onto and control and figure that you can't game this.
Right.
You have to hold up the mirror and do your own work around, wow, what is getting in my way of control? And how do I start to interrupt those neural pathways and find different pathways? And that is the journey of leadership development, which, by the way, is also the journey of personal development.
Yeah, it's that's an interesting overlap there. And as you were describing that, I was just kind of struck with this picture of when you're a doer, you don't have to like sell your hands on doing what you want done. They just do it. And if that, to your point, is the only like tool you have of just kind of forcing it through, as you come into a leader, there's like an ostensibly there's like an implied extension of your sphere of influence beyond sort of literally just resting on your skin, because that's all you can really control, into this, illusion that if I can just apply the same type of, neural pathway style control mechanisms by just saying, okay, just do this, we think that that's going to work. And then guys end up falling flat. I mean, it's the classic story of like the top salesperson becoming a sales manager and just the whole team like falling apart because they don't know how to coach, or they don't know how to, make that connection with folks. They just say, we'll go get your numbers. It's a pretty interesting thing. And I'd love to kind of circle back to the efficiency, effectiveness paradox. And it's so interesting to me because, it's almost like efficiency. It's almost like efficiency falls flat when the timeline is too short. So like, hey, this is really quick. It's really it's really efficient for me to just send this email. Okay, done, off the list. Well, inherent to that approach is the assumption that everyone's going to read the email, they're going to get it, they're going to run forward, and so forth. So ultimately, to your point, like what seems like more work and harder on the front end and more time and a waste of time to get these people who should just be listening to me to actually quote unquote buy in, it ends up, to your point, being way more inefficient over the long run. The quality tolerances are all over the place. The adherence to the new policy or the new direction is not really like digested by anybody. How can we get people to do that mindset shift quicker? And frankly, it's particularly for high conscientious people who have control issues in general. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, good question.
No offense to the high conscientious folks listening to this, right?
Hey, I resemble that remark. I know all about that. So here's the challenge, I think, because I think what ends up happening, in the name of efficiency, and again, high conscientious and high productivity, hyperachievers, right, where we tend to go is we have this list. We want to get through our list. The challenge is, as we are building our list, oftentimes we're building our list from our own perspective. So we think of things as our agenda.
Right.
And, and this is, going back to the salesperson who gets promoted and it's like, just get your numbers. Or the other thing they'll do is say, well, this is how I do it. Do it this way.
Do it that way.
Which works for you, but it doesn't work for other people because they're not you, which is why when I coach people, I don't sit there and say, do this, do this, do that. That's just giving advice. It's actually trying to elicit from them what's going to work. So ultimately, if we go back to this question of how can you shift things? You got to shift your agenda. You have to actually build your agenda based on their agenda by starting. And this is how I start coaching sessions. If we could wave a magic wand, what outcome do you want? So really thinking about the outcome and spending some deep thinking time on what is the desired outcome from this. Imagine you and them. What do you want them to do? And then work backwards, beginning with the end in mind. What is going to help those people to come along, become part of this, as opposed to, I've got to get this off. I mean, you talked about the fact that, I sent this email, it's done. I mean, how many of us hate it when we get sent, I call it emails, subject line phishing, right? Where someone's forwarded something on, the subject line means nothing anymore, but it's been forwarded 7 or 8 times. And then what they have is they send it to you and they say, hey, Nick, FYI, see below, right? And you have to go and find it. And everyone's like, I've done this in live workshops and people groan, right? Grr, I hate that. I hate when people do that because it's such a waste of my time. And then I ask, how many of you do that to other people? Oh yeah, I guess I do that because it's off your plate onto somebody else's.
Right.
See, we have to understand the industrial age. The main model was the machine. Okay. We now are out of the industrial age. We can't think like a machine system. The system is now the network. And the core aspect of the network is interdependence. And so leaders need to be much better systems interdependent thinkers and realize when I pull this little thing, this happens over here. I can't see it, but we have to be thinking 2, 3, 4, 20 steps ahead. It's a totally new world for that for most people because we tend to kind of focus on where we are. So I would say build your agenda based on their agenda and then ask them. See, this is the cool thing. When you take on the facilitative mindset, you come into these conversations and you don't lead by telling, you lead by asking. And then very quickly, when you ask, you get some data back to calibrate your answers because you're not just making stuff up. You get to find out what do they think? Like if you say, what do you think the biggest priority is right now? They'll tell you what they think. So part of it is, can you enter into these conversations with a structure and a framework, but be comfortable with hanging out in the ambiguity of the unknown and then start to shape things together? And again, there's a whole letting go of control to be able to do that. It's another very unusual yet very important skill set.
And there's really a lot of opportunity in it. To your point, this mindset shift, I mean, you can really multiply your impact. And yeah, it may take a little bit more work on the front end to make that connection with people and make them feel safe and give them the sort of fair process to understand the rationale behind the decision or give them time to voice it or talk about, sometimes people just need to process it. You know what I'm saying? But there's so much more like multiplicative benefits from doing that, especially when that becomes part of your like management cadence, because again, that connection really becomes authentic. They feel like they're in it with you. And it's this bizarre thing. So I got this advice one time from the wife of this guy that I worked with. And we had really little kids at the time. And I think about this advice like maybe every weekend, like all the time. And she was like, you need to know that each of your kids is different. They are their own people. And I really feel convicted by that advice when I am being that like super authoritarian, well, just do it. And it's like, well, they're not me. They're not like me. They're not like just quote unquote, children, like automatons. They're human beings, and they have a different personality, and they have different things that they care about and so forth. We bring, though, that same kind of caricature in terms of our management when we treat people like labor units, or we just think they're all like us. And, if I'm the type of person that when I was in that position, any email I got, I wouldn't mind sorting through those 20 different email chains to pull out that nugget because that's my personality and I don't want to, I want to be on top of my business. Well, you can't just assume that every single person is that way. And so, again, it seems so simple, yet it must be profound because no one's doing it. Just treating people like people, how you would treat a neighbor or how you would treat a cousin or a friend or something else in the context of the four walls of a workspace. It seems like revolutionary, but it's very, very basic and it's very, very human, Totally.
I love your example of the kids, right? And treating them all different. And one of the things that my kids are now 17 and 14. And one of the tenets my wife came into, and I give 95% of the credit for how amazing my kids are to my wife, because she really came into parenting with a very specific vision that we were not going to engage in power struggle with the kids, which is not an easy thing to do. It takes infinite amounts of patience, which she has way more of than I do, honestly. And one of the things that I have learned from the process, though, is that part of that means you don't major on minor stuff. And it's funny because like when my kids see their grandparents, and my dad was married 3 times, so they've got a whole bunch of grandmas at this point. And but what's interesting is how they see like one of the grandmas like will come to my daughter and like be all that kind of, you need to comb your hair, and she gets all like, and my daughter was like 6 and 7, and she's like, what are you doing? Because like it's just, you know what? She's 7. Like she's not entering a beauty contest. Her hair isn't that. It's fine. But again, we all are triggered around certain values for whatever reason. Like, and when things aren't in alignment, I mean, just like the way for some people having dirty dishes in the sink overnight, it's like, I can't live in a house. Like, just notice where you get triggered, because that's the gift for you to learn from. And so as different people, I sometimes joke when I'm working with leaders, I say, wouldn't you love it if everybody on your team thought and acted exactly the way you do? You'd have a bunch of mini me's, which would be good for about 2 seconds.
Totally.
Until you realize, actually, we need the complementary strengths and the abilities that everyone else has, because the goal is not to be the smartest person in the room. The goal is to be the facilitator who brings out the smartness in everyone else.
Right. Yeah. The goal is not to be the smartest person, but to facilitate the smartest collective or something, to unleash that or something.
Completely.
So I love that. I love that picture about the grandmother freaking out about the hair. But yeah, majoring on the minors is a hard thing because sometimes you don't know. Like materiality is a very interesting concept, and it seems like a harder concept for some. I don't know if it's personality types or backgrounds to get than others. Obviously, it means if $1 million are added up on a register and it's off by a penny, well, that doesn't really matter that much. If $1 million is off by $100,000, then that does matter. To your point, one's a major, one's a minor. But it's so hard, I think, if you don't have that self-awareness or you haven't done that kind of internal work to know which of these things that I get triggered by are super important and like I need to be like, keep that triggering going, and which things do I need to just let evaporate away. If you don't have a good handle on the multi-factor equation that is you and your values and how all those things kind of interplay, then it seems like the easiest thing is to say, well, then everything's super important and everything has to be right. To your point, that leads to this kind of like false cloning actually, of your team and people being some kind of portion of themselves. As you've tried to, you've done this hundreds of times with folks, and it seems like you take them through some kind of a Socratic exploration of what might be holding them back or what reframes they need to, put in place in order to really, translate their personality into a better leader. What kind of resistance do you run into often as someone is shifting from this, just again, caricature, this end of the spectrum, everything matters, everything is critical, to a more balanced, like, okay, these are preferences, these are non-negotiables, and these don't matter. How does that pathway go usually?
I love that question. So the pathway, oftentimes, if you think about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's phases of grief, like, and grieving,
Yeah.
is like the whole, like, kind of like shock, denial, anger, acceptance, bargaining, acceptance. There's some of that goes on, I think, in a lot of ways. It kind of starts with the shock and like denial, like this can't be, like I'm, and then it's that sort of, and then there's an anger, realizing that, and for me, anger is around there's a boundary and something's been violated. I mean, if you think about just like generally what makes us angry, it's because we have some perception of a boundary that's been crossed, which is why we get upset. So what I find in working with people is one of the things is they need to, first of all, put themselves in an emotional state where they can be receptive. I mean, if you are trying to do like if people come to me with coaching for a coaching session and they are just like got to get through this, like it's so clear they are just kind of in their head,
totally
like action, like they need to kind of drop down and like, I'll sit with like folks like, hey, can we just take a couple minutes and do some breathing, some kind of like easy, like simple mindfulness stuff, just to get you to be here. Because most people live most of their lives either in the future or in the past. And if you want to start looking at this stuff internally, you have to slow down and be present. Mm-hmm. So part of it has to do with slowing down. And then the other thing that for me, working with people, it's to make sure they feel, as they're working with me, they have to feel exquisitely psychologically safe. Like I have to create a very safe environment where people, and part of it has to do with me, like I did before. And I said, oh, that sounds like me. Like I'll do that stuff with my clients because I want them to know that I'm not perfect. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to support you. And this is a journey that we're all on, this journey of becoming not just better leaders, but better humans. And so giving them the space and time to kind of drop into that. And then it's really listening. I listen for both the language, the words they use. So if I hear things like, well, it's always like this, or it's never, okay, so now we are now universalizing, or this thing's going to happen, it's going to be horrible. Like, oh, you're now catastrophizing. So I'm listening for some of the language, but I'm also reading, again, I trained as an actor. So I'm reading the body, I'm reading the voice. How does it sound? I'm reading their body. Where are they breathing? Like, and I'm picking up all these cues, and I'll just reflect back. It's like, as you say that, or I'll say something of, they might have just said how they're getting all this stuff done. And yeah, I really should change things. But then they put this little smirk on their face. And I'll just say, I just noticed that you smiled when you said that. What's going on? Just to call their attention, because the body doesn't lie. The body has a lot of wisdom. So it's pulling on a lot of different multidisciplined approach to ultimately helping people to, we talk about the importance of looking in the mirror for emotional intelligence. You want a clean mirror. And humans, we are really good at deceiving ourselves. We will tell ourselves what we need and what we want to say. So part of it is creating an environment where they can honestly look in the mirror and not rush to judgment of like, oh, that sucks. Oh, that's ugly. Oh, like, no, like, wow. It's like, you need to take stock. Benjamin Franklin famously had his 13 questions he would ask himself on a daily and weekly basis. Like, do you ask yourself, am I living according to my values? Do you take the time to ask these questions of like, what are my values and how am I living them? And what could I be doing better? How are my relationships? How are my most important relationships? And what am I doing to put, as Stephen Covey would say, put deposits in the emotional bank account? Like, what have I done today? And to be that level. So it's about becoming more intentional. And part of that is becoming more conscientious, which again, for a lot of our listeners today, well, that'll be like falling off a log. You're already conscientious. It's just about moving shifting your frame of where you've been conscientious to these other things that frankly, culturally, and certainly in the business world, we don't talk about a whole lot. Like this is all kind of goes underground, which is why people like me get pulled in to kind of help surface this, because while it's underground, it still has massive impact.
Yeah. And as you were describing that, I was thinking, you're really modeling what a leader should be doing, right? Like for you to make that connection with somebody that you're coaching, for them to feel safe, and for you to be able to read their body and read the tone in their voice and all those kinds of things, and get those insights out of it to share back with them that they'll actually digest and, will hopefully resonate with them. There has to be that level setting. There has to be that sort of in the moment intentionality. So that's probably kind of a nice byproduct for folks to get a model that there's kind of, they're sitting in the passenger seat of this car, so to speak, and seeing how this car can be driven. And it's not really as scary. To your point, it's just shifting our focus from this day-to-day task to this broader thing and seeing what fuel actually drives people. Because the fuel that drives you is your own whatever. It's your own goals. It's your own personality. It's your conscientiousness, whatever those things are. But tuning in, and we obviously know those to a greater degree than we do with any other human being that's in our circle. But just extending out that sphere and trying to understand what kind of fuel does this vehicle need? What kind of fuel does this vehicle need? Yeah. And not putting diesel in an unleaded car, can have a lot of great impacts on that car going faster. So I love that. I love that picture and that intentionality of it. I want to talk a little bit about. You said leading by asking instead of leading by telling. Mm-hmm. That to me seems very profound. Again, you got a lot of really nice, profound things that you say. Let's double click on that and dive into that. Why is that so hard for folks? Is it the unknowns that can come out of it, you think? Is it the lack of control, they think? You
named it. I mean, it's so much of it has to do with a lack. When I lead by telling, I already have my agenda and I'm basically here to push it onto you. I'm treating you like a task getter dunner. Yeah. Or in the world of the Industrial Revolution, you are a human resource. You ever wonder where that term came from?
Well,
yeah,
that's interesting. Right? You said that because I always thought it was like this is the resources for the human beings of the company. But to your point, this is what controls and dictates the labor units, the automatons that have hands and feet in our organization. It's it's kind of opposite of what I thought.
Yeah, no, it is exactly that. So it's you have to not see people as these resources, but see them as human beings. Yeah, that's what gets in the way. I want to touch on something you just pulled out. We were talking about earlier about the process of modeling and coaching. One of the things that's so valuable, and we live, in the United States here, is that we're a very independent, individualistic society. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I have found that really helps to accelerate leadership development is it's a team sport. And what I mean by that is seek out and get, whether it's a group or a coach, an individual, is do the work in public in some ways. You can't just you can't just bury yourself in books and think I'm going to do, like the way you actually see that you're improving in this is by having a place, whether it's a mastermind group or a group coaching or an individual coaching or asking people for feedback. How am I doing? And being able to start having these conversations. And also it's incredibly normalizing. Suddenly you realize I'm not the only one who's all screwed up. Like I thought I was the only one. And it turns out that what you're experiencing is probably really somewhere smack in the bell curve of normal behavior. Totally. Because we all have to deal with it. And so reach out and look for some support around that. I mean, whether that's me or anywhere, one of the things that I've created, and this came out of COVID, I partnered with a tech company where we've basically taken these principles of connection, communication, and collaboration and turned them into a gamified micro lesson 30-day online leadership challenge. Cool. Where people from companies from all around the world are coming together and they practice day to day in 5, 10, 15 minutes, practice the skills of becoming a better connector and communicator and collaborator. And they share with each other. And it's so powerful. So I share that because don't just try to do this in your coat closet. Get out there and find other people to support and to be supported by.
And what I also find is that there's this maybe a fear of failure and a fear of like messing something up. And life is a lot more like baseball than it is like brain surgery. You can't mess up in brain surgery, or you're gonna have a dead patient or a comatose patient or something. Yeah. Baseball, you can mess up 2 out of 3 times over 20 years and still get in the Hall of Fame. So it's a lot more like that. And I think if we humanize ourselves, and the thing I try to encourage folks to do is to like humanize yourself to your team. That's the quickest way to get their guard to drop. So what are things that, you wish a leader would have told you? Well, tell those things to the team. Hey, I don't have all the answers. Hey, I might not have this right. Hey, our job is to get the right answer out of this group of smart people, not for Nick to have the right answer. And just doing things like that and kind of flipping that structure is a really, I think, an accelerant to get to this kind of panacea that we're talking about. There's this other interesting dynamic when we were talking about why these old structures persist in today's knowledge work economy. And I was kind of thinking about, think about a fraternity that has every class that's come through is all hazing. Some new class, for them to break that hazing cycle, they have to say, well, while I got hazed, I'm not going to haze these guys. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, exactly.
it makes sense why it keeps perpetuating. You know what I mean?
Oh, you have touched on such. I was just talking about this with my wife the other day, because really what we're looking at, you don't have to call it hazing, but what we can call it is caring and kindness. I mean, because the fact is, if you look at the different generations, and we still have a few boomers in the workforce, and then we got Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and beyond now. But basically, if you look particularly for Gen Y and Gen Z, they came in with a whole different value proposition because they were raised by a different set of parents that basically treated them like human beings much of the way through. So they got to the workforce and they went, I'm not going to play by these old rules. These rules suck. In fact, these rules are so bad, I'll quit. I'll move back in with my parents. And they did. And so suddenly, and a lot of for example, the big four consulting firms had to change their business model because it used to be churn and burn, like work them hard. And so what you're talking about here is so important. And to me, what that is now, it's about kindness, is realizing, wow, like I now have to level up my respect, my caring, my listening, my consideration of others as humans, even though I never got that. That's not fair. Some generation has to be the tipping point and the shift. And I think what an awesome opportunity to be the people who break that chain, right? And maybe that will be, love to think, if Gen X ever had a legacy, maybe that's it. How can we be the ones that maybe break them? We were a small generation, but to help to break that chain, because I think we can see both sides, having kind of, we can see both sides of things and looking at the future going, yeah, you know what, that old school, it's a dinosaur. It's not going to work. It's going to die out. And you know what? Our planet can't afford it on so many different levels right now. I mean, look at what's going on between race relations and climate change. I mean, we've got some big problems to deal with. And if we're still hanging out in the whole, cauldron of fear, power, and control, that sucks so much energy. And we've got work to get done. So,
and what's kind of interesting also, if I do say so myself, it seems like parents are better at breaking those cycles. Like if a parent was raised in like an abusive household, it's like they swing the other way. I mean, not in all cases. Sometimes those perpetuate, but there's so many cases that I've seen in my life of somebody raised in an abusive household or raised with an alcoholic and they're teetotalers, or I'm breaking that cycle and I want my kids to feel totally loved. That works in our own family, and I wonder why it's so much harder to if that's working on the family level, that means that that's something inherent in us that we want to correct that and make a better life for our kids. Why do you think that doesn't translate into the work world where these structures continue? Again, it's 2021. We've been talking about knowledge work economy for freaking 30 years now. Why is that same thing that's wired in us not manifesting in our workplaces, you think?
Yeah, as you say that, what comes to mind is the famous Peter Drucker quote, who said, you put a good person in a bad system and the bad system will win every time.
Yeah, okay.
And I think what happens if you look at just the family of origin and people breaking that chain in their family, I think people feel like they have more agency. Like, okay, I'm now the dad or the mom. The family's got 2, 3, 4, 5 people. I can, I'm going to focus laser this in. Whereas I think there's so much unconscious systemic stuff going on. I was just talking about this with a colleague the other day. So I'll give you an example. I mean, how many of us recognize that, humans are not designed to sit in chairs, either live in meetings or live on Zoom, hour after hour after hour, without our bodies want to move and get up and, from a well-being perspective, right? So we kind of recognize that. Yet how many of us have really said, you know what? I don't do 60-minute meetings. I do 45 or 50-minute meetings because I work better that way. And so does everyone else. And that's going to be the standard. And just for us to go, that's the standard. But somehow I think, this expectation, again, this goes back to you are now, we're kind of in the knowledge work coal mines, is that you will suffer because you're getting paid, and we have to eke out every last minute of this meeting because we're going to somehow get more value. It's again, confusing efficiency with effectiveness,
right?
Because if you've done the back to back to back to back, I know, for me by 1 p.m., 2 p.m., I am cooked. Like I can't cope because I've literally, I can barely go to the bathroom between these things sometimes. Right. So it's just thinking through things in a very different way and looking at all these different elements and going, what do we need to kill here? Yeah. One of my colleagues, Lisa Bedell, has written this book called Kill the Company and got this wonderful process called Kill a Stupid Rule. I mean, how many things do we think are rules, which in fact are just inherited ways of that's how we used to do things around here. Yeah, and we need to stop and question those assumptions and recognize them. I'll give you another example. This has to do kind of in the work-life well-being piece. Obviously with asynchronous work and technology and working from home remotely, is people want to work at different times, and I totally get it. And so having really clear expectations and understandings about, I may be sending emails at 2 a.m. But this is where I end up counseling and coaching leaders, because they say, I tell my team, I say, look, if I send you an email at 2 a.m, you don't need to respond to it. And I say, I understand that. You understand that. However, inherent in the system is rank and hierarchy. And if I get an email at 2 a.m. from the boss and I somehow see that, whether I respond to it or not, that is now psychological baggage that I am carrying around with me when I should be recovering and resting and not thinking about you or work at all.
Okay.
So what you need to do is shift. You can say, change your approach. Like, you're the leader. You need to, you can set, delay delivery, schedule this to go out at 9 a.m. at working out or whatever.
But that's learning a new button.
That's that's exactly, but that's the whole sense of building things out from their agenda and not from your agenda. Your agenda says, oh, it's easy. It's 2 a.m. Send, go.
Right.
Their agenda is, I just got an email from the boss at 2 a.m. Shit. What am I? Oh,
yeah.
You can edit that out. Yeah, exactly. So that's what's going on. So there's a lot in the system that needs to be unpacked and rebuilt. And we have work to do. The good news is, and one of my colleagues, Frederic Laloux, has written a wonderful book called Reinventing Organizations. So it's really hard to do new stuff that you've never seen role modeled. So I love Laloux's book, because there are some really cool progressive companies that are doing some really cool progressive stuff. And if you don't have a mindset for it, then you're not going to do it. So start to think about, if you can't come up with your own ideas, then steal other people's great ideas and start implementing them.
Totally. Yeah. Steal it all is what I say. And, just to your point, seeing a model of something helps you emulate it. You can copy it, emulate it. And then over time, as you sort of settle into it, you can put your own spin on it and put your own, unique flavor to it. I was struck by something in one of your talks, and it really resonated with me, because the way my brother and I, we run this company together. And we have always said, hey, we're going to be a people-first company. We're going to be a culture-over-everything company. And inherent to that framework is the understanding that while, of course, we're a for-profit business and we want to be a going concern forever and we want to win this infinite game, obviously profitability is a piece of that puzzle. We are not going to myopically focus on dollars. We're going to focus on the inputs, because the input, dollars are an outcome. That's an outcome to this complex system. The thing I really have agency over potentially is the inputs. So we're going to focus on those inputs, and the theory being, if we plant good, seeds, we're going to have a good harvest. I can't control the weather, but I can control that we're putting the right seeds in the, well-tilled soil, whatever we want to say. Yeah. I see the same kind of what I would call kind of this dollar myopia applied. That is in most organizations from a corporate perspective, but it also kind of fractalizes out into teams driving metrics. So talk to us a little bit about that framework and where the shift can move toward, so those outcomes are a little bit more effectively had while controlling, so to speak, influencing things that are actually within your control.
Yeah. Oh, great question. So you just touched a great word. We came back to it again, which is control. If you think about so many people who have been educated to become business people, they are really comfortable and fluent in the language of numbers, right? And so the number becomes the great pedestal that we put everything to, and revenue and earnings per share, and becomes all of this. And as you've already mentioned, Nick, these are just lagging indicators of inputs that ultimately are behaviors of people. And so my challenge to all of us is to think, what are we prioritizing in terms of our conversations? Because people are really comfortable with numbers, because numbers are always the same. If I talk to you today, 7 is always 1 more than 6, 1 less than 8. Tomorrow it'll be the same. And we get very comfortable with that. And we feel like I've got some control and power over this. Yeah. All right. And so if you think about your typical business meeting, all right. So let's say it's a monthly update of any department, function, company-wide, doesn't matter. Generally, where do we spend our time? What we tend to do is, let's do a status review. How are we doing on the numbers, right? We start with the numbers. And then after we get into the numbers, if we get through all that, sometimes that takes up the entire meeting. Right. We're back and forth about why is earnings per share down 2%? Why are, whatever, loss prevention is up, whatever, right? So we've got numbers in whatever category. Spends the whole meeting. Then we might get into what are our key initiatives, our projects, right? And then if there's any time left, maybe we'll focus on the people. What's going on with the people? What's in the culture? Which we might get to, but we'll probably just like send that off to HR and maybe they'll have them do something. Right. So we've kind of basically, again, not just what gets measured gets managed, but where we spend our attention is what creates our culture. Right. So we created a culture that is really focused on metrics, numbers, measurement. And again, that may motivate the heck out of you, but is that motivating everybody else? I worked for a company for a while, privately held company, and the CEO literally said this. He said, I need you all to earn more profit because I want to retire in a couple of years.
By all means, let me roll my sleeves up.
Now I'm really motivated. Thank you. Thank you for inspiring me. Talk about building the agenda from your perspective. Totally. Right? Wow. Like that was a literal thing that came out of his mouth.
And he wasn't kidding.
He wasn't kidding. This was his plan. And he felt like the benevolent deity. Like he was, he's the patriarch. I deserve this. Yeah. All of which to say is, what if you flipped your meeting around and actually you focus and prioritize your time on the people? You'll get to the numbers, but maybe you won't spend as much time because you realize it's the behaviors of the people are what deliver those numbers.
Right.
So it's the willingness to do that. And if you want to read more about this, someone who's done a great job with this is Hubert Joly, who was the CEO of Best Buy. And he's just published a book this past year called The Heart of Business, where he talks about how he turned around Best Buy. And he's actually used that exact model as he's moved through things. So this can be done. So yeah, we have to understand and I love the fact that you're looking at this beyond, how can I maximize every last dollar and do this? Because is that the point? Because I used the term the infinite game, again, Simon Sinek's great book that he based those principles on. One thing to consider, and this is the problem when we have a strictly numbers mindset, it also plays into the psychological belief that when I achieve this thing, then I'll be happy. And let me ask everyone who's listening right now, think about when you've kind of had that mindset, because I know I've had it. It's like, as soon as my book is published, then I'll have succeeded. Well, as soon as the book is published, I kind of celebrate for a day or maybe an hour. And then it's like back to my old, same old. Now it's like, what's next? And so if we stop making achievement of this last result, the end goal in and of itself, and thinking if I do this, then I'll be happy, and flip it and start going, how do I fall in love with the process? How do I create a sustainable environment where I love the people that I work with so much that I can't imagine anything else I'd rather be doing? And you know what? We do good work and we earn some return and we invest this in whatever we invested, but we're enjoying this along the way. Because I have worked with lots of people and I have coached people who have 7, 8, probably 9 figures after their names. And I've met some miserable people. Totally. I met some happy ones too, but I've met some it's not going to make you happy. And that is the myth. And that is the myth that the American consumer culture is selling, because a lot of marketing and advertising is like, you are unhappy now, but if you buy our thing, our product, our service, then you'll be happy. Well, even you buy a new car, set point, you buy your new BMW, whatever it is, doesn't matter. Your car of choice, your set point goes back, and then you need the next thing to fill the hole. And again, I've worked, I've met so many people who got into coaching and this kind of field in their late 30s, early 40s, mid 40s, early 50s. And they say like, I was doing all this thing. I was climbing and I realized that I wasn't there. And I call it the hole in the soul. Right? That's what I've come to call it. Yeah, it's the hole in the soul. Right? Is that you realize you can't fill that hole up with more stuff.
Right.
And a bigger promotion and a bigger paycheck isn't going to do it. And the world will tell you it will. I mean, the marketing world will tell you all like, do this, come here, fly here, spend your vacation here. You've got to rethink these things. And these are harder, deeper questions, because that means you have to ask yourself, what do I value? What is really the most valuable to me? And again, I love the fact that you've got so many Gen Y, Gen Z people who are questioning these things, because I think it's becoming more of a mainstream cultural question at large, where asking the question doesn't feel quite as scary. But I think it's an important question for any of us as leaders to ask.
Yeah. My gosh, there's another book in just that last answer that you just gave. This language of business, this the language that we're all like soaking in is such an outcome focused world. Like it's such an outcome, in sales, we call it commission breath. Hey, buy this thing. You know what I'm saying? Like you can smell the desperation on me. You can smell that I'm so outcome focused. And there's just, to your point, there's so much magic in like letting go a little bit and being, and divorcing ourselves from that outcome for the simple fact, again, just to kind of bring it full circle. It's never going to fill up the soul. everything is anticlimactic. You publish the book. Okay, great. Now what?
Yeah.
You get the promotion. Okay, there's a whole new set of things. You're embarking on the next leg of the journey. So the magic, it is kind of journey over destination. It is kind of, those outcomes aren't going to fill anything up in you. And again, that's very freeing to engage in this more, human-based, human-first approach to our organizations. This thing is going to break in a good way. These structures are going to break, I think, in our lifetimes, and it's either going to break from people at the top who are maybe baby boomers or maybe Gen Xers who are still kind of, living in those vestigial structures. It's going to take their light bulbs turning on at the top, or to your point, it's going to take just the time for these other generations who have a different hierarchy of values to just ascend to those positions of power. Either way, it's going to break soon, and I think there's just a big opportunity for folks to break it before their competitors do, or break it before their counterparts in the market do, because to your point, so much can be unleashed by just recognizing that I can control, I can influence the inputs, I can't control the outcome. Yeah. And also it's a way more fun way to work. It's way more enjoyable to actually value the people that you work with and value their, create an environment where their unique God-given gifts can be brought to light in pursuit of this mission, because none of us have all the answers. So listen, I've had a great time on this. This was everything I hoped for and more. Where can people find you? Where can they learn more about you? Where can they find your book?
Yeah, easiest place to go is all things Alain Hunkins is at alainhunkins.com. I'll spell that out for you. It's www.alainhunkins. All the various services that I offer. You can actually download the first chapter of my book, Cracking the Leadership Code, right there. You can buy the book from Amazon, etc. places. There's links to all that. You can also learn about the 30-day leadership challenge that I mentioned along the way. And if you have other questions, you can reach out. There's a contact form if you're interested in any ways that I can be of service, because what really lights me up is helping people to kindle the fire of their own brilliance.
Well, check him out. Check out the book, Cracking the Leadership Code. And until next time.